So hello, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. It's really nice to see quite a few familiar faces and quite a variety of people joining us. And some people I haven't seen in any of the sessions so far. I'm Catherine. I work for the Stove Network in Dumfries. This is the fourth of our online series of discussions where we're exploring the main themes that we see emerging in what we're calling creative placemaking, that being a community-led approach that uses creative activity to support collective decision-making and have positive change for the people and the places that those people live. Creative placemaking is something we've been exploring here at the Stove through the work that we do in our community and the approaches to that work that we're developing with others in terms of learning, shared practice, support, advocacy, understanding. And the main themes we see emerging within this work and that we've been focusing on are space, physical and conversational, people and power, communities, creative practice, and society and activism. And this evening, we're going to focus on creative practice. Some of the questions we've been thinking about within that theme are things like, what is the role of the artist in community-led change for the places we live? How can this be used by our communities to help imagine, vision, and shape new ideas for our places? How does a creative practitioner negotiate their way into a genuine collaboration with communities? And tonight, we're very lucky to be joined by Anna Francis. Anna is an artist and researcher and co-founder of the Portland Inn Project and a director at Artspace Gallery in Stoke-on-Trent. She's also an associate professor of fine art and social practice at Staffordshire University. Anna's going to be sharing with us her experience of how an artist, and I really liked the way you put this, Anna, when we were talking. So this is from our setup conversations, how an artist comes to be concerned with the long-term thinking and visioning of a place, community, and the different ways that are needed to navigate and support that.
Thanks so much, Catherine. And thank you so much as well to the Stove Network for inviting me to come and talk to you all today. And I'm just going to try to share my screen and make sure that's working okay. Yeah, thanks so much to the Stove Network for inviting me to come and talk to you today, and for all of you for joining us. I'm really pleased to be able to come and talk to you about the work that I do here in Stoke-on-Trent. I'll just quickly start by letting you know my name is Anna Francis and my pronouns are she, her. I'm white, middle-aged woman with brown shoulder-length hair, and I'm wearing a black sweatshirt, and I'm in my studio here at Artspace Gallery, where I am a director. This is an artist-led space, and we've been running since 2006. I'm also an associate professor of fine art and social practice at Staffordshire University, and so I've been teaching on the fine art course here since 2005. But what I'm going to talk about this evening is one particular project that I've been working on here in Stoke since 2015 roughly. So I'm pleased to kind of really focus in on one project. Hopefully the slides have moved on for you. So I'm going to start by talking about the work that I began around about 2006 with Artspace Gallery. So Artspace Gallery started around that time because before that we didn't have a contemporary art gallery here in Stoke, and we didn't really have any studios where artists could make work. And so really the gallery started in response to a gap. There were two graduates from the fine art course who were just sort of finishing and thinking about the fact that most people when they graduate would move away, and wanting actually to stay here in the city and try to make a viable living as an artist here. So Artspace Gallery started really within that context. And really, I would say that my work since 2006 has often sort of sought to reframe overlooked resources via curatorial projects, participatory and social works that have in recent years moved further into community and cultural development. So I've been really interested in particularly housing renewal in cities since 2006. And that's really because back in 2006, when I had just recently moved back to Stoke-on-Trent, there was a lot of housing renewal actually going on in the city here. So we are a post-industrial city. We do still have a little bit of ceramics industry here, but a lot of that industry was sort of closing down and closed back in 2006. So there were large spaces of empty land around the city as a result of that sort of deindustrialization process. But also the government at the time had commissioned what was called the Pathfinder scheme, which was a housing renewal scheme which focused mainly on terraced houses in the Midlands and the north of England, and sort of designated those as no longer fit for purpose. And as a result of that, in communities across the Midlands and the North, whole streets of terraced houses were being compulsory purchased and then demolished with the idea of renewing that housing for sort of modern families. So in the city at the time when I started this work, there was lots of emptying out and people being moved on from communities, and it was having a very sort of physical presence and physical experience. And I think as an artist at the time, I started to think about, you know, how I might document that and start to talk to people about those processes and how government decision making affects people's lives. And so really I started doing the work that I still do today within that context. But I guess back in 2006, 2007, I saw myself documenting the processes and the sort of visual impact. Whereas, as you will see from sort of later work, I'm now looking at how to kind of intervene within those contexts. So it's kind of changed from documenting into thinking about what can be done. So yeah, going back in time around 14 years ago, I was applying to lots of different opportunities. And like lots of sort of artists when they're starting out, I was really starting to think about how I might take the next step in my arts career, really responding to calls for opportunities and projects and exhibitions. And I was really thinking about how I might stop doing my part-time job as a carer. And I started at that point to keep a spreadsheet for my own purposes, just to think about how much time those proposals I was writing would take and what they were asking for, and then whether or not I was successful. And it actually was quite depressing reading the spreadsheet, because I found that quite often I was spending a lot of time writing applications or responding to other things and not so much time sort of making work as an artist. So in 2008, I decided to sort of switch my approach really to creative making and stop waiting for opportunities to come to me and start to create my own opportunities. And so the important thing I decided to do back in 2008 was to designate 2008 as the year of finding spaces in the city for art. And that was just a kind of loose thought that I had, that I would make something happen every month during 2008 with that as the kind of framework for me. And that would see the city becoming a test bed for new ideas and ways of thinking about the city and the role of the artist in the city. And that could be any kind of project or test. So it could be an exhibition or an event, it could be a consultation, a research trip, it could be a collaborative project or a residency or an intervention of some kind. But I think most importantly at that time, I started a blog to document everything that I might do during the year. And so in 2008, from setting myself that task of doing one thing per month, by the end of the year, I had 47 blog posts detailing 47 different things that I was doing, which included, lots of visits to other places, making connections with other people who might be considering similar questions around the role of the artist in cities and in places. So I visited lots of different places, and interestingly, and did lots of different projects and small interventions, and then exhibitions and things like that. By the end of the year, I noticed that actually commissions started to come in. So I guess in starting out and generating work, it started to generate more work and commissions, sort of having a life of its own. To give one example, a residency that I undertook in Liverpool, it was 2008 when Liverpool was City of Culture, and I did a residency in a council house, a project called the Institute for the Art and Practice of Dissent at Home, and they were a family who recognised that as a family, they had a sort of a certain amount of resource, and they allocated a percentage of their family income to hosting artists in their spare room. It was really interesting for me because Liverpool was another pathfinder area like Stoke, so significant housing renewal was happening just up the road from the council house where I undertook the residency. So it was really interesting for me to go to Anfield and to talk to people on the street in Anfield about how they felt about the processes of regeneration there. And I did a photographic piece which documented one street of terraced houses there, which went into the Future Visions of History publication. But a lot of my work is located here in the city where I live. It's always in relation to other places. I'm always aiming to understand our local context in relation to those other places. And so when I do go elsewhere, like Liverpool and other places, I'm often thinking about how that relates to us here in Stoke-on-Trent and how national decision-making impacts on local experience. One project I did between 2009 and 10, again, thinking about how artists might respond to gaps. I found out that Stoke-on-Trent didn't have a tour guide. I was interested to learn that we as a city didn't think we needed a tour guide because it wasn't necessarily the kind of place that tourists wanted to visit. So I set myself up to become the city's tour guide, and I brought people to regeneration places around the city. You could pick up my regeneration tour pamphlet from the local tourists office and then come for a regeneration tour with me. But as a result of the busy year in 2008, I was able to be selected for the biggest commission I'd received at that time. It was a project called Give Me Your Hand, and it was commissioned by Multistory in the Lascelles and East Handsworth area of Birmingham. And they were going through a different type of housing renewal process. It wasn't a pathfinder area, and they were retaining the terraced houses there, but they were thinking about how to make them more environmentally friendly. But again, it was about kind of speaking to the community about the processes of change and how they felt about it. And it was a really interesting project for me because I realized my ethos and ethics as an artist within that project around really trying to immerse myself in a location in order to sort of really understand and be able to sort of work with the community there. And I did spent a lot of time in the area and working with different groups. But I felt frustrated at the end of the project because, like lots of projects, as soon as the funding had run out, the project ended, and all of the work that the communities had made with us and the connections that we had made together just stopped too. So I started to kind of question whether or not this was really a good way of working and whether or not there might be better ways of working longer term with communities that sort of don't require all of our energy in a small, short, sharp process and then nothing beyond. And so I started to think about myself and my role in society, and started to ask, what if I don't go home at the end of the day? What if I actually work where I live? What greater impact and understanding of my role might I have if I'm actually focusing my energy in one place? So I'm sort of jumping ahead. I'm not talking about a whole load of different projects. Helen has helpfully shared a link to my research profile at Stafford University, where a lot of work between sort of 2007 till now is detailed. So you can have a look at that big gap that I've missed if you want to later. But around 2013, the project which I'm going to really talk about now started. So I mentioned about housing renewal and the Pathfinder areas here in Stoke-on-Trent, and in lots of areas of the city, the housing was demolished. And the Pathfinder scheme actually was scrapped in 2010. So in those areas where the demolition happened, we ended up with long-term empty brownfields. And it's only actually in the last couple of years that we've seen those brownfields start to be built on. And another part of the work that I do, which I'm not talking about today, has been to look at and reimagine those brownfields. But in the Portland Street area of Stoke-on-Trent, the community there, a traditionally working class community, were quite resistant to the compulsory purchasing that happened within the Pathfinder schemes. And as a result of that, before the scheme was scrapped, no demolition actually had taken place. But what that did mean was that when in 2010 the scheme was scrapped, lots of boarded up properties that had have all of their servicing removed from them were sort of just remaining on the streets of housing here. Owner occupiers were still within some of the housing and living next door to boarded up terraced houses, and quite a few absentee landlords who just stopped caring for their properties in the knowledge that they would be purchased and then demolished. So between 2010 and 2013, was quite a desperate time for this particular community, with lots of empty properties and a lot of antisocial behaviour and crime happening in the area as a result of this collapsed regeneration scheme. The city council at the time owned around 35 properties in the neighbourhood, and were starting to think about what to do with those. And so they decided to sell the homes for £1. So you might have heard of this £1 house scheme. And my partner and I, also in 2013, when the £1 house scheme was launched, found out that we were having a baby. And as artists, we were sort of recognizing that we might struggle to get a mortgage. And so we decided to apply for a £1 house. What interested me as an artist and researcher who'd been looking at the impact of the housing renewal schemes was the way that the scheme was set up. It required that you would live in your £1 house for at least 10 years. And there was a clause written into the project to say that you would contribute to community development and community life. And I guess as an artist, this really interested me to think about what can we bring as artists to this context, to an area which has been through quite a significant and traumatic process. What can I bring as an artist in terms of my skills to try to sort of look at developing and repairing some of the damage caused by the regeneration process. So we were really pleased to be offered a £1 house, and we moved into our £1 house in 2014 with our then, I think, 6-month-old daughter. And I began very quickly to start to plan how I might respond to this idea of community development. I was commissioned in 2015 on a 3-year project, which was commissioned by the British Ceramics Biennial. And the project was called Community Maker. And it was really based on this plate design, which I had bought, I think from a charity shop, but these plates were designed by Enid Seeney, who was the first female to train in the design studio at the Spode factory, which is where the British Ceramics Biennial was based. And this plate was called the Homemaker, and it came in the sort of post-war years when people started to have a bit more disposable income, and it was sold in Woolworths, so it was like something that a lot of people had in their homes, and it was, the design really was, you know, all of the ingredients of a successful home. I was starting to think about what the ingredients of a successful community might be, so I wanted to redesign the plate and make the community maker plate rather than the homemaker plate. Because I'd learned that one of the things that the community of Portland Street had continued to do, despite the really difficult times they've been through, and the sort of removal of all sort of local infrastructure, was to have community events which they called Bring a Plate, where community members would bring a plate from their kitchen with food on it, and that would sort of form a community meal. I think some places call it a potluck. So I wanted to kind of see that as a symbol of the resilience of the community, and design a plate that all of us could have in our cupboards and bring out at community meals. And so that was my kind of general idea, was to kind of start on that project to kind of make this sort of celebratory plate about the area. And I would sort of generate imagery by working together with the community on something that would represent us and this neighbourhood. So I started very simply from a pop-up, well, a tent basically, because although 33 £1 houses had been sold in the area and new people had moved into them, and there was still lots of existing community members living across the streets, the pub, the shop and the community centre were all shut. And so there was nowhere for us to sort of do workshops. So we had to be in the tent. I started aiming to sort of really think about what might work in the area. So I didn't want to sort of just focus on the negatives. What do we want to change and what is failing here? Sort of trying to come from an asset-based community development sort of stance, starting with, you know, actually what works, and then moving on to what might need work. So we started really simply by mapping what works, and then areas of the neighbourhood that people wanted to see improved. In the first year of the project in 2015, we did lots of workshops together, sort of generating lots of imagery. But what became really clear really quickly from the community was, yeah, that's lovely, Anna, to hear that you want to make this plate, but we don't really need a plate, actually. What we need is a space to come together, because, you know, everything's been stripped away from the community. I'll introduce Rebecca at this point as well, who is a collaborator on the project that I've been working with since 2015, because Rebecca was just starting on a touring project which came to Stoke-on-Trent in 2016. She took her project to a number of cities around the UK. It was a pop-up social space. And the pop-up social space would form a committee, and people would decide what the programme would be. And because we didn't have, as I said, a community space, Rebecca's pop-up social space visited, and people got involved, and it was a great programme of activity. And they said the same thing to Rebecca as they said to me: we need a permanent space of our own. And so after our two projects in 2015, Rebecca and I joined forces in telling the council that the community needed a space. And as a result of that, the council said, well, you know, we've got this pub that we own and it's pretty derelict, but if you can prove to us that the community want it, we'll hand it over to you. But you'll need to have the evidence. You'll need to kind of give us a business plan for what you want to do with it. So Rebecca and I, having only ever really met once, applied to Arts Council England, and we got the funds together to take over the downstairs of the pub in 2016. We just about made it habitable. As I said, it's quite a derelict space, but it was just about okay back in 2016 for us to run a program. And importantly, we ran a 14-week program, and we did 53 different activities across 4 weeks, trying out things at all different times of day to see what kind of activity do people want to do. And really importantly, asking different questions each week, which would form the evidence for a business plan. Asking questions like, what if the community owned the building? What should it be? What if it were open every day? What would happen here? And who should be involved in that? But an important early question came from a community member. Do we even want this pub? And do we want the pub forever? And a community member went round one day and did a poll with this blackboard. And there was a not quite unanimous vote for yes, and that we did want it. At the end of that year, we handed in a business plan based on our findings, which advocated for the City Council to transfer ownership of the building into community hands. And then between 2016 and 2018, we continued to programme cultural activity and campaign for the building to be transferred into community ownership via my project, the Community Maker project. And then in 2017, we recognised that it was getting really difficult for us to work together in the area, because the pub had become unusable. There was a big hole in the roof, and we were back working from a tent on the street. And also in the area at the time, there were really significant drugs problems, drug dealing, and the community had stopped using the green space where we would pitch the tent because of those problems. And there were lots of other issues locally that people were telling us. And so back in 2017, we actually, we were surprised in a way at that point that as an arts project, we started a services meeting, which was a monthly meeting with local services, the police, the antisocial behaviour team at the council, the environmental team at the council, and some other community partners and our community members. And we had an action plan in those monthly meetings, and community members were able to report directly to the services to make sure that the resources that we saw being really sort of stretched in our neighbourhood were being targeted where they were most needed. And it meant that actually some of the issues were being dealt with a lot quicker. But it also enabled us to be able to focus on the work that we were doing, and made it safer for our community to be able to work together. In May 2018, the asset transfer of the pub was agreed at our local council cabinet meeting. And so in summer 2018, we started on a new programme to reimagine what the building would be when we took ownership of it. So we had to build a temporary workshop at that time with the community, because the pub's big hole in the roof meant it was really unusable by that stage. So we built a space with Baxendale architects who specialised in a community co-build, because it was really key to us that we wanted to co-build the building eventually with the community. So based on one of the main rooms in the pub building, we built this structure which had the same footprint, and it became a ceramics workshop, a kids cafe, a boxing ring, a fashion house. We did lots of different projects, a film club, radio workshop. But importantly, that summer, for 1 week, the space became an architecture school, and community members redesigned the pub building with us and with our architect, Godson Egbo. The architectural structure that we built together was shortlisted for the Reba McEwen Award, which is the award which recognises architecture for the common good. And our project design was featured on the front cover of the Reba Journal. And this was really important to see actually some of the the rhetoric around our neighbourhood beginning to change, because before that we still do have our neighbourhood described as deprived, underserved, hard to reach, and most recently left behind. And this was our opportunity really to start to sort of change the story of our neighbourhood through having some positives coming out. Yeah, about the building, we got planning permission for the building based on that community design in December 2020. And we're currently writing funding bids for the delivery of that design. So this is how we hope it will look. But really, we see the building as a catalyst for community development. So we called the Portland In Project, and it is very much about delivering this building that the community wants to have. And it's been a very slow process in many ways. But through the programme that we do to involve people in that process, we recognise that lots of other things have happened, which are, creating impacts of their own locally. We started on a project, sorry, that should say 2019 rather than 2009, 2019 to 2022. We were pleased to be awarded funding by Creative Civic Change. And we were not allowed to spend that funding on the building, which seemed terrible at the time for us, but actually it enabled us to focus on everything that wasn't the building. So identifying some priorities for ourselves and importantly, developing our governance structure around who makes decisions within our project. So one of our priority areas around sort of local decision making included setting up a community decision-making panel back in 2019. Our community decision-making panel is made up of the services that work with us and some of our partners, but importantly, they are outnumbered by our community members. And I guess it's an unusual structure because a lot of, residents associations, there's people voted in each year, and ours doesn't work like that. Anyone can be on our community decision-making panel at any time. So it sort of changes and flexes. But we do have sort of core people who come every single time as well. And that's quite important to us because our community is often sort of changing too and flexing. Oops, seems to have frozen. Oops. We also recognise with the Creative Civic Change project another priority around developing skills in the community so that we would be able to ensure the long-term sustainability of our project. And that's involved lots of development of lots of different skills, but in particular, we have an area of programme known as the Play End. So it's a local term for the section of the ceramics factory where the wet and dirty clay-based processes take place. And yeah, because we are the potteries here in Stoke-on-Trent, that kind of sort of heritage and legacy is around us. And also it means we can quite easily access cheap resources in ceramics. And there are still jobs in ceramics. So we are hoping that longer term, we can support people into work here and helping people to develop new skills. And one of the projects that we've been working on for some time is the Portland Pigeon. The pigeon for us was an important emblem because our pub building with the hole in the roof was a way that pigeons were getting into the building, and often on top of the building you would see a lot of pigeons roosting. But also pigeons are sort of regarded in sort of really lots of different ways. So some people see them as sort of a sort of important companion species. They are sort of trusted friends, and in the past flying pigeons have sort of brought messages from home, but also people talk about pigeons as being flying rats. So we sort of recognise that our community has been talked about in a negative way, but that we hope to look at and reframe the way that our community is seen, just like the pigeon. So also we wanted to fix the hole in the roof. So quite practically, we decided to develop a pigeon ridge tile. So we could fix the hole in the roof with this set of ceramic pigeons, and it would be a way for us to solve a physical problem, but also that we would be able to market that product and bring money back into the project. And also all of us in the community could learn new skills together. So we went through a process of sort of prototyping that pigeon, and we settled on a design, and we launched our first flock of pigeons in October 2020, and they sold out within 2 hours. And we now have a pigeon club. So our young people get involved in making pigeons, but also while Youth Club is on, some of the mums have been learning about how to make pigeons and have been making our next flock of pigeons as well. So what are we working on now? Besides working to get the building sorted, and we have a fifth of the money that we need to do that, and we're doing big fundraising at the moment, we have been working on writing a 100-year plan for our neighbourhood. During COVID, we didn't stop our programme. Actually, I think we were busier than ever, sort of supporting our community members. And one of the things that happened was that creative packs went out to community members, and doorstep visits happened on a weekly basis to see if people needed anything. And we found ourselves doing lots of different jobs, but one of the things was about sort of delivering these creative packs for families. And some families started growing something from seed for the first time ever, and using their terraced backyards. So all of the housing locally has a backyard rather than a sort of garden. And most people don't really grow anything in their backyards until this point. And we found that actually just by delivering some seeds to people, some people started to rethink that important outdoor space. We then wanted to sort of support thinking around the contribution that these little backyard spaces might make to the wider neighbourhood and biodiversity locally. So we worked with a biodiversity specialist, Andrea Koo, who came in to talk to residents about what they could grow in their yards, and we did a planting project with them. And thinking about how the backyards could be a sort of stepping stone for nature to get from one green space to another. And it was Andrea really that got us thinking about having a 100-year plan sort of environmentally for our neighbourhood. We started by looking at Capability Brown, who was a landscape designer, and he designed a local landscape, Trenton Gardens. And what was interesting to us about his thinking was that he was designing for the future, for people like us who's, you know, he would never have seen the results of his gardens. Trenton Garden here in Stoke is one of the landscapes that he designed, and we went to the gardens with our community, and it was really interesting for us to sort of recognise that actually thinking in landscape terms about our project has been really helpful. So for some community members, they want to know about the entire landscape. They want to know everything about the project and what we're aiming to do over the next 100 years, even, whereas others just want to know one small detail and want to focus in on one small detail with us and one small part of the project. And that's been really helpful for us in sort of thinking more sustainably about our project. We found that after COVID, people found it difficult to make decisions locally, but that somehow in thinking longer term, that sort of lifted us out of that and kind of gave us permission to sort of dream longer. And we've noticed as well that the acorns are important, but we're thinking about the oak trees. We're considering the things that we can do today and what impact those things might have for us longer term. And so this last year, we've been working with our community to write a 100-year plan and to think about what each of us can contribute to that plan. And we're also developing a set of influencing tools and launching a website probably at the end of November, and for other community members, but also for funders and decision makers. We want them to be thinking longer term too, so that communities like ours can be supported in longer term thinking. So I'm sort of running out of time really, but in part of the work that we started on is to try to implement changes in people's backyards. We started on a new project to design some fern bricks because a lot of the terraced backyards are in sort of shady areas. And it was based on actually a locally designed fern brick that was made for a couple of years here a long time ago. And we learned that where we work currently used to be a brick factory. So we were interested in making bricks on the street. And we think this will be our next product that we are now in the process of refining to be able to sort of be in a position to sell those. And this is just one part of our 100-year plan to kind of to increase biodiversity in the neighbourhood and to think about the ecology of our neighbourhood and our project. So that's all I'm going to say really. There's loads of other things I could have sort of thought about and talked about, but I'm going to stop there and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that hopefully I can see you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anna. That was really, really inspiring. I hope everybody's got lots of questions in your heads or pop them in the chat. So many things that it would be great to sort of find out more about. I like your use of the word ecology there, and just you talking about that long-term practice in your place and almost what led to that, and then how that the focus of that shifted. There's a lot of synergy there between a lot of the work that we're focused on here at the Stove, and yeah, that the role potential that role as a catalyst, or that aim to be a catalyst for community decision making, support, development, is really interesting to hear your story in that. So thank you.